Welcome to the Content Podcast, Conversations with Silicon Valley's Creatives. I'm Daniel Garcia, your host and the cultivator of Content Magazine, published by SV Creates. This episode of the Content Magazine podcast is brought to you by Bonfire, a Silicon Valley digital agency building elevated websites for ambitious brands. Find out more about Bonfire at bonfire.com.
Hi, this is Brandon.
Today we talk with Brandon Roos. He's an arts journalist, a DJ, and a contributor to Content Magazine. Hey Brandon, this is Daniel. How are you doing?
Doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right. I'm excited to talk to you because, we used to see each other probably much more often when there wasn't a pandemic.
Yeah, we would run into each other, whether it was, planned or unplanned, a lot of events that we would see each other out at and shake hands, hugs, all the good stuff.
Yeah. We do have to get back to, we should need to go get coffee. I mean, we'll do this podcast, but then let's get some coffee next week or something like that.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, it'd be great. So I was thinking, and I tried to look, and I'm not sure, but I think the first issue that you wrote for us was in 2000, was like the first issue for 2013. If I remember correctly, it was the Underground. I think it was the Tommy Aguilar Ungrammar profile. Was that the first article?
It might be. I don't remember offhand, but I think Underground, that was, where was it? Vino, the wine bar at San Pedro Square Market was the pickup party. And I remember that was the first one I ever went to. So if that's
Yeah,
the issue, then that's the one. Yeah, I think
that
that
sounds
might have
about
been
right.
the first one.
Yeah, so that's like 2013, and now we're in 2021.
Yeah, it's
So,
wild. I feel like if you just asked me offhand, I wowould say, yeah, I've been writing for content for like 3 years or something, and then you realize it's been 8.
I know.
Yeah.
It's been a long time, and I totally appreciate you, and just even, you know, just because you have such an interest in music and totally connected to the local scene, it really has opened my eyes to what's going on here, and really, I think, benefited our readers. So your suggestions and everything are always great, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. That really means a lot, and it just brings me back to wanting to share that story of how I first got involved because it just felt so serendipitous. I'm sure I've told you multiple times, but just for the listeners, I encountered Content Magazine at a San Jose State alumni event called Classes Without Quizzes. And it used to be this half day thing where you could basically go back to school to just check out fun seminars for free. And I think the tagline was like the creative, innovative culture of Silicon Valley. If it's not the tagline as it
Yeah,
was today, it was similar. And
yeah,
Flora, who was the managing editor at the time, did this presentation, and I just remember thinking, like, this is exactly what I want to be involved with. I was stunned at the design, and I bugged Flora after the lecture and basically said, "What do I need to do to get involved?" And I'm not usually this persistent, but I think I'd sent her a couple more emails just saying, "I really want to be involved. I don't know if you know I'm serious." And finally, she said, "Just calm down. Like we'll get you in contact with Daniel." I think we met at Phil's, I believe, and then you wanted to
could
get
be.
me
Yeah,
involved, and it's been happening ever since. But it just
I
felt
know.
like I felt like that moment where it was just like I need to do whatever I can to help this because this is exactly what I'm looking for.
Yeah. So then, at that point, had you been already writing for? Because I know you've written for the Metro, San Jose Jazz, and were you already writing for those other kind of like venues or outlets?
I believe I was regularly writing for Metro at the time. I had gotten my start online. There was a website, I believe it's still active, called hiphopdx.com. At the
Oh yeah,
time, it
that's
was
right.
one of the most visited kind of hip hop sites for like news, interviews, that kind of stuff. And it all happened from like a cold email. I had just emailed kind of the info thing to ask what it would take to write for them because I figured you'd have to have this sterling record and why am I even wasting their time? And I got an opportunity to intern for them, wrote for them for it was probably a few years, ended up getting
Cool.
involved locally with Metro, and that was kind of my first time really getting a chance to write about local culture with regularity. I had done a
Yeah.
couple. Like right around the time that I was just getting started with content. I think I had done a couple covers at that point too, and then I had also gotten involved with San Jose Jazz in June 2012. I want to say
Okay. Yeah.
I
All right.
came on as a marketing associate and was I basically was kind of tasked with writing blog stuff and Massimo Cassesi, their director of marketing, who was at the time and then has since returned. Um, I started working with him and I don't know what their expectation was. It might have been just to write a couple blog posts and then I end up creating this whole thing of like I'm gonna do 30 stories and here's what we're gonna do and I had this whole calendar of how we're going to push all this content out, which at the time was,
Yeah.
looking back, was super ambitious. I just didn't want to flub the opportunity. So um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I had some community involvement at that point, but I had started off writing online, basically covering like I'd interviewed ASAP Rocky, I'd interviewed Future, a lot of other kind of like underground rappers and that stuff. But it was sort of a place that had a
Yeah.
more, I guess, national and global reach. And then since I've kind of catered my writing to like a more localized thing, which I've always been really passionate about.
Yeah. Yeah. When did you first kind of like get the bug for writing?
Well, it reminds me of I guess elementary school. I There's a couple things that come to mind. I had this I used to collect hockey cards when I was in elementary school and was a huge hockey fan. Um, and I used to write these stories because I was a huge sports fan. I mean, there were nothing crazy, but I would like play a hockey computer game or whatever, and I would, write something about like, oh, the Pittsburgh Penguins were down 3-0 to the New York Rangers, and then this guy scored, and this guy scored, and it was an amazing victory. Everybody couldn't
Yeah.
believe it. I look back now and I kind of
You
laugh
would
at this.
actually you would actually write those down, like you would write the, rather than just kind of like say it in your head or something, but you'd actually write down like the post game commentary of a video game.
Well, yeah, it was all like made up scenarios and stuff, but yeah, I,
Yeah.
I actually have printouts of them. I mean, they'd probably be
That's
like,
cool.
a couple jumbled paragraphs that kind of barely made sense, but that kind of
That's
was
cool.
where it started. And then I remember a couple things in elementary school. There were a couple friends of mine. I think in fourth grade, we got to spend extra time in the computer lab writing scary stories, and then we would actually share them with the principal at the time, who would
Hmm.
just the three of us would share these stories, and I guess it was a way to kind of like, I don't know, help spark our creativity, and I
Yeah.
guess that's sort of where it started. There was another thing too where we were doing this sort of choose your own adventure kind of challenge
Okay.
in fifth grade where the class was invited to write chapters to this story. And so the class as a whole kind of contributed. And I remember being really proud as like one of a handful of people who had like two chapters inside this like adventure
Yeah.
story. So, looking back,
That's
those were
awesome.
kind of what planted the seeds for me, I guess. It was just writing fictional stories, writing personal poetry and stuff. And I guess it was the music thing came in just being a huge music fan starting in like middle school, high school, and I would write song lyrics and try to write songs and stuff like that. And then I guess an outgrowth over the years kind of changed more into like a journalistic kind of place. At first it was writing fiction, then it was writing poetry and lyrics, and then now it's kind of gone into, I guess, journalism, arts journalism, creative nonfiction, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's cool. And what do you most enjoy about, being kind of, an arts journalist? What do you most enjoy about doing that?
I think it's getting a chance to really like lend my talents to like spotlight other people's passions. I think that's
Yeah,
when
cool.
I do this, and I think why I keep doing it is I love sharing these stories of people that are just, I guess, sharing their heart and soul, or sharing a deeper part of themselves. And it's something I've always really like not taken for granted and tried to like really honor that as best I can. And hopefully people see that in the care of my
Yeah.
writing, is like, because I believe that stuff's really important. So I think to me it's just, I guess, getting a chance to relive and remember why music and the arts mean so much to me by hearing like firsthand, like that story and that passion personified in different people. And it's different every time, but there's similar through lines. But I guess it's just, feeding off of that energy I get from people that have chosen to, dedicate a life, or even, whether it be a hobby to the arts, whether it's visual arts. I obviously love, hearing about music in particular, but just
Yeah.
I feed
Yeah.
off of that passion.
Yeah. That's something I've always really appreciated and admired in you is the responsibility that you seem to put on yourself and some to portray the character, portray the story, portray the person as authentically to who they are as possible. And I've always like really appreciated. I mean, I know we've had conversations of like, okay, Brandon, that story is like a day late, and I know that it's like,
Guilty, guilty.
yeah, but I'm not worried about it because I know that it's it's because you're trying to craft it to represent that person in a true way without an error. You know what I mean? And that's great. I mean, that's really cool.
Well, I mean, first of all, you're really kind for saying that, and I really appreciate you saying that. It really means a lot. And I hope with every story I usually add that tagline, and I mean it. About
Yeah,
thanking you for the opportunity to continue to like share these stories. I really, it really matters a lot to me, and it has its pros and its cons. I think there's
yeah,
I I'll tell people sometimes the thing I struggle with is like I've gotten better about it over the years, but I used to really believe that like every story I wrote was a failure if it wasn't the best thing that I had ever written up to that point. And it came down to
yeah,
like watching every sentence, watching every transition. Am I highlighting this moment enough? Does this feel right? And I say all that to say that I think the to this day, I think the biggest compliment I can ever receive is when I actually get that feedback from the people that I interviewed that read it, and they
yeah,
tell me great job, or they feel like I got it right, because
yeah,
to me
yeah,
that's what matters more than anything. Is like I hate for it to be a case if I'm sharing somebody's love and passion and they tell me that I didn't get it right, or I
yeah,
didn't get it wrong. Like that, I take that stuff so personally. So, and
yeah,
thankfully, people have been really really kind about that. And but yeah, I appreciate
yeah,
you saying that. I take it very 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 seriously. And
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's good. I mean, and that's the thing too. I mean, quite honestly, when you look at it, it's like, even for me, like you talked about how you love sharing the stories, and that's my kind of thing. I've started the magazine, but I wouldn't be able to even do my part of sharing the stories if it wasn't for someone like you, for writers. You know what I mean? Because I'm not a writer, and so I so appreciate that craft. It's very difficult. I don't think people realize how hard it is to take an hour conversation or more and whittle it down to a story and try to communicate the key points as well as make it enjoyable to read, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think one
It's
of the
hard.
things I've like kind of learned over time too is like just I used to hate simplicity. I used to really think like I've got to use
Hmm.
big words and make these, these
Right.
long sentences with all these like different clauses and stuff. Like I was an English major at San Jose State, and I just remember always being a huge fan of like Robert Faulkner, and like just
Hmm.
these dense paragraphs where every word
Yeah.
mattered. But I've kind of learned to, that there's a certain beauty and simplicity in just being able to I love that ability to craft something where people can't figure out why it just flows so well, but it's those figuring out how to pepper in those little details where there's more going on than people think. And I'm glad that
Yeah.
I've been able to transition out of like feeling like this is an assignment to stroke my ego, when I'm really, if I'm trying to share something, wouldn't I want to make it as accessible as I can?
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That's cool. That's kind of a valuable lesson, I think, even for young writers, right? It's like, and that's the kind of thing that I've always even struggled with some writers, and why we always do things in the third person is because, my kind of phrase is like, um, a good writing is you don't recognize, you don't see the writer, right? You
Hmm.
get to know the person who the story is about, and I think that's difficult, especially when you're starting out. You do want to have every phrase to be so colorful and poetic, which is cool, but there's something about that. simplistic, or not simplistic, but like brevity and well crafted word that's not without being too flowerful, and you know what I mean? It's difficult.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, you're like well versed with as much as anyone with like my style and stuff like that. And I've just, and maybe part of it is just from working with content and this kind of molding my voice in a certain way, but I've never really wanted to be one of those people that really like interjects myself into the conversation. If there's little moments where I have to like, I think I might have done it in the Headhunter story, but stuff where it's just like,
Yeah.
for example, like I talked about how I'm watching six guys and it's like watching six brothers that hadn't seen each other for months and they're completing each other's sentences. And to me, saying that
Yeah.
like I'm sitting there watching that is in service to the story. It's not, you know, me pointing out, hey, look at me as a writer, but it's like trying to explain as a viewer what it's like to better understand how, like, yeah, these guys like break dance and they do this for like the city, but this is a brotherhood that I'm talking about. There's something much deeper than just you know
Yeah.
watching people dance. There's some, it's a family reunion that I'm watching.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. What are some of the challenging things do you think for doing kind of like arts journalism and profiles? What's one of the more challenging aspects of doing that?
Well, I think I'm kind of reminded of just one of the drawbacks to writing in general. It's one thing that I do enjoy about it sometimes, but it can be a really isolated experience at times. It's like, and it's interesting too because I'll have these deep conversations with people, and you'll realize like this might be the only interaction I've had with these people, and I go away feeling
Hmm.
like, man, this is like a close friend. But you
Yeah.
realize like, oh, this is just I had I talked to this person for like an hour and a half.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
can be a little deceptive sometimes. I think sometimes it can feel like such a solo pursuit. It's hard to really,
Hmm.
you don't necessarily have that feedback all the time. Sometimes with an editor you'll have a little bit of a dialogue, but it can be really like, you work on this for a while, and then
Send it
you're
off.
yeah, you're obsessively like crafting this thing, and you're like, I think it's good enough, and then it goes out into the ether, and it's hard to know. Like I had interviewed Rachel Myrow a few years back, and thank you again for
Yeah.
the opportunity to do that.
That was fun.
um
Yeah.
she was awesome, still is awesome. um for those who don't know, a correspondent for KQED at the time. I think she was the Silicon Valley like correspondent for KQED,
Yeah.
and she had kind of mentioned the same thing, about doing stuff for radio, where you have these people that you develop this intimate relationship with, and they feel like they know you, but you're doing these stories constantly, but you don't get feedback. So it's, yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's part of it too. Is it's hard to know your impact. It's hard to like gauge it, right? Where and but it's also so fulfilling because I'll have people that'll tell me, like, oh man, like I read your story in the latest issue of Content, like really good job. And I find myself like, wow, like you took
Yeah.
time
That's
out of
great.
your day to read that. Like I guess that feedback feels so much more, it matters so much more to me because it's so few and far between. But I guess that you don't get that feedback. It's isolating, but I can also be a little bit of an introvert, so it works good for me sometimes about really being obsessive, but sometimes it gets a little neurotic, as you said, with like
Yeah.
deadlines sometimes.
Yeah.
I
Well, it's
had
always good to get positive feedback, right? I mean,
Oh yeah, yeah.
for any kind of artwork, it's nice to have to get recognized for all the hard work that goes on. Um,
Do you run into the same
yeah.
thing as a photographer, or do you find that you get decent
Yeah.
feedback?
Well, I'll tell you, the one thing, like I love, if I could, I would shoot every person for every issue. Like, 'cause I really love meeting people. And then, like you're saying too, is like, so you spend like an hour with them. But for me, it's like, I feel like we're friends now. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so pretty much everybody that I've ever shot throughout the thing is like, I consider them a friend. And it's, I might only see them that one time, but I feel like, I don't know, like there's been a connection, and that's kind of great. then as far as like photos, yeah, I mean, you get, sometimes people don't like the photos, sometimes other people don't like them, some people like them, and I don't know. I think that's the thing. Maybe even writing's the same way, or any artwork. Like I want people to like them and enjoy them. And I'm like you were saying, like you want the best story, right? Like every time you're writing it, you wanted it to be the best thing you ever did. And I always kind of want to do like the photo, and this is going to be the classic photo of this person. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
know, like when they pass away or when you look back on their life, this photo is going to be used. This is the iconic photo for them. You know what I mean? So I have a pretty high pressure on myself. Um, so I guess, and I don't know, I guess the kind of thing is I kind of just keep on doing it.
Yeah, that I mean
you
that's
know?
beautiful what you just said though. I mean, I can definitely uh, I can relate to that reverence that you have of like really wanting to elevate your subject. That's really beautiful.
Yeah, that's cool. That's what I like what you're doing too. Yeah, yeah, that's good. It's a good way to say. I've never thought about it. We're really elevating the subject. Like it really is all about them. So it's not about any photo tricks that I'm doing, right? Or any writing tricks that you're doing, but it's really like, how do you convey this person? I think photography is a little bit different because I believe photos lie,
Mm,
right? I
how
don't think you can
so?
ever really capture someone's who they are. Um, and so for me, it's more of like, I want to create a picture or a photo that causes people to wonder who that person is and then read the text. That's what I kind of feel like my job is. So even more than a great photo, it's or capturing their soul. It's sparking curiosity so that they'll read, and then the person that we're featuring, they'll feel like they're a friend to that person as well. That's kind of my kind of thing.
That's a fascinating take. Now I feel like I got to go back and check out your photography and past issues, and I mean I'm sure it's there. I'm sure it's there.
I don't know if it is. It's probably I'm missing the mark completely. Yeah. So you have this whole intersection with music and writing. How did that kind of come together? I know that and because now you're DJing, and I think are you DJing? Are you one of the house DJs pretty much for the Wax Wednesday at Camino for the next part of the series? Are
Yeah,
you a
that's
regular there?
Yeah, that's correct. It's me and Swell, otherwise known as Max Borkenhagen. We're sort of the
Yeah.
two residents, and then it's sort of a rotating series of guests. But yeah, I'm a resident there. I
Yeah.
do sort of a monthly spot at the Continental and for the Changing Same, which is a Thursday night there, and then
Yeah.
I also do another monthly at Camino Brewery with my girlfriend Jess, and then our friends Rowan Jackson, who run a thing called First Year Music, a radio
That's on
show
Is that Sundays?
every first Sunday of the month. Yeah, it's a monthly.
Every first Sunday. Yeah, cool. And then, so yeah, how did this intersection between music and writing come about?
Well, I think it's hard for me to pinpoint like the exact moment. I think the intersection first happened when I decided to like write that cold email. I think
Hmm.
I'd looking back on it, I think I wrote for my high school newspaper. I went to Piedmont Hills High School, and I think I'd done some like show reviews. This was back when the Campbell Gaslighter was still there in downtown Campbell.
Oh, yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I'd done some like CD reviews here and there, which I still remember friends would just kind of say, "Wow, like this feels like you would be reading this in like a real paper kind of thing." But I just think it was my passion for music and just those hours of listening and going to shows and stuff. It just kind of came out. I just think it was a natural extension of me loving to write. I think that's something I've reconnected with recently too. I don't think I ever really appreciated how much I like relied on writing just as like a almost like an outlet or a therapy, just to like write
Hmm.
for the act of it. I don't know if you
Hmm.
felt that way about like photography sometimes, but there's just
Yeah.
something about like feeling a connection to something, even if it's like not for a story and it's just writing because you need to write. I think it was always there and I'd always nurtured it in some capacity, but um
Yeah.
yeah, I think it was just sort of a natural outgrowth to feeling some way about music, feeling a need to express it. I think I'm kind of reminded too of in the early hip hop DX days. I think there was a part of me that felt like that legitimacy and that byline meant that like if we got into a music argument, I was right because like I was like
I'm
technically like
published.
yeah, exactly. Like that was my card to prove that like haha, like I know what I'm talking about. And you know, the funny thing is the more I've like written about music and the more I become a quote unquote like expert or resource or whatever,
Yeah.
the more I realize none of it really matters. You know, it's like so much of it is so subjective. That's why I got so sick of writing music reviews because I feel like they can all be whittled down to
Yeah.
like I liked it, you might not, that's okay. You know, like it really
Yeah.
is that simple. And I think that's why I love those profiles because to me it's like it gets so much deeper than that. I want to know like what the music's about. I want to know the history. I want to contextualize it. I don't want to tell you whether it's good or bad because there's plenty
Yeah.
of music that I'll tell you is the greatest thing in the world and you'll think it's trash and that's fine.
Yeah.
Like it's not meant for everyone. So I feel like I'm dodging the question, but I don't really know. I think it was just I loved music, I loved writing, and they came together and then I've just kept doing it. You know, it's probably been
Yeah.
it's this was actually my 10-year anniversary in January was when I wrote a story on Baby Bash for Hip Hop DX and it was published in like January or February 2021. So it's been like a 10-year journey so far.
That's cool. So January 2012 or 20 what?
Yeah, 11. Yeah.
2011. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, so it seems like a lot of that kind of stuff happened for you. 11 and 12 and 13 kind of things, right? From jazz to content to metro to the hip hop
Yeah, it was
DNX.
Hip Hop DX.
DX, yeah. Yeah, that was all
Yeah,
kind of that same time.
yeah, it was a really interesting time for me. I was just like overstimulated and sort of overworked at the time, but it was by choice. I just was so my thankfully my brother when I was growing up really had me involved with like the downtown scene and First
Yeah.
Fridays and that kind of stuff. So like I was aware of stuff that was happening locally and like I think uh San Jose Jazz was like the real catalyst for change because
Hmm.
I loved what was happening and all of a sudden I felt connected to it. I felt like I was being that change. You know, I remember a couple weeks on the job. I was thankful enough to get to work with a singer named Jackie Gage, who I know really
Mm-hmm.
well.
Yeah.
And we were both working together at the time. I remember going out to San Pedro Square Market, and we were programming live music at the time on Fridays, and just thinking like, man, like I'm a part of this. Like I can put my money where my mouth is. Like I really want. Like I've been such an advocate for this scene for so long,
Yeah.
and now I feel like I have the opportunity to push for it, and I have the opportunity to like seize change. And I dove in head first, whether it was getting involved with Metro, staying involved with San Jose Jazz, getting more involved with Tommy Aguilar and what he was doing at the time with Universal Grammar. At the time,
Yeah.
he was booking the
The
Pagoda.
pagoda. Yeah, the
Yeah,
pagoda, yeah.
it was. I believe it was formerly an Asian fusion restaurant inside of the Fairmont. It was sort of a dead space, and he would do shows there periodically. Stritch had just gotten started. Blackbird Tavern had opened
Yeah.
up. I was doing
Yeah.
some like email writing for them. I was just wherever I could get my hands in anything involved. I was doing it, and it got to the point where I probably wasn't doing all of it very good, but it certainly I got my feet wet and I just was like I don't want to stop being an advocate for this, you know, because I believed in it
Yeah.
so much and my brother like had really instilled that in me about really being like um SJ all day, you know,
Yeah.
that was kind of a motto he had handed down to me and you know I still try and wear it proudly. I'm not as involved as I was back then, but I think I needed to work a little bit smarter and I like to think I'm still pretty involved.
Yeah, you're still involved. Yeah. So, so DJing, I think I've mentioned this before. I mentioned it to other people in town. I don't get DJing. It seems like there's a lot of DJs in the
Hmm.
world.
Yeah, there are.
What? Tell me what makes a good DJ? What makes a messy of DJing versus a
Ah, yeah,
Wando?
yeah.
No, I'm just
Yeah. You can be both. You can be both. But
right. Both are great and have records, but
yeah, it's a great question, and I think there's a variety of things, you know. I think there's an answer for like what makes a great technical DJ, and then I think there's
Hmm.
something about like I don't know what I would call like a superior like transcendent DJ. And I think those are the people that even your regular DJs look up to and just say like how do they do that, you know? And to me a technical DJ is somebody that like has a technical skill, whether it's digitally, whether it's on record, of being able to mix two records together, of kind of creating this like seamless dance party, of playing the hits, of giving the people what they want, of like keeping a dance floor crowded, of keeping, if you're working at a bar, keeping the drinks flowing so the bar's happy, like
Yeah.
making a party atmosphere and being able to give the people what they want without having to ask them. You know, to me, like
Yeah.
that's one of the technical aspects, but I don't think that's why I DJ. I'm not,
Hmm.
I'm not knocking that because there is a true art to that, you know.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
but to me, the people that I really like admire, to me, I think of DJing when I'm really able to do it the way that I want to do it. I think of it as like speaking through song. You know, there were a
Hmm.
lot of
Okay.
times where when I was first starting, I had started on like a controller, um, which is sort of like this digital USB device where you can run a program called Serato, where you're basically playing digital files and mixing them and doing different stuff.
Yeah.
Um, I think what grounded me was just having days where I was just so like I'd have a bad day and would feel really bummed out, and I would just want to DJ because I'd feel like
Hmm.
somehow this is I need to get my feelings out. Whether it
Yeah.
was how I
Yeah.
felt about somebody, whether it was feeling sad about something. And there were nights where I would just DJ until I felt better. And I wouldn't know where I was going, but I just was like, just trust in the process. And I would
Yeah.
get in this flow state because, I mean, it happens all the time with writing, but with a lot of things in general, I can be very self conscious and doubtful.
Hmm.
And when I'm really in the zone with DJing, I just find that the answers come to me, and when I don't question it, it feels right. And
That's cool.
but to me, the beautiful thing about DJing when I feel like I'm doing it and I listen back and feel like I did it the way I wanted to, it's saying something through music that I felt like I couldn't say with words. And it's such an overused thing, but it's like a quote unquote vibe, there's something.
Yeah.
I think there's an emotional resonance to how people can stitch together music. It doesn't have to be technical. I try to be technical, not always, it kind of depends, but I think the people that do it really beautifully say something that you can't quite explain, but you're mesmerized or you feel seen, or
Yeah.
you're just amazed. I think of there was this guy named Anthony Valadez who's he's a morning host now on a show in LA called Morning Becomes Eclectic, and he had DJ'd one night in downtown San Jose, and I just remember him playing like salsa music, and then like three songs later playing like a house song. And
Oh yeah. Cool.
if you actually looked back, it did not make sense, but the way that he did it, it seemed so natural. And I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
me what the beauty of DJing is where you just feel like it's almost like this group hypnosis, and you're like in the hands of this person who's guiding you emotionally, and it transcends words. So I don't that's kind of my extended elevator pitch for DJing.
Yeah. I've been in those situations too, where I mean, like you could, be somewhere and then there's a DJ and you're like, oh, they're playing a bunch of songs that I like, right? Then there could be some other kind of experience where I don't necessarily even know the music, but I'm like, wow, like you feel that vibe. Like there's something to it that's creating this other worldliness, this connection to the space, to the people, to the time. You know what I mean? And it is pretty beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the beauty of DJing, and what I look for when I'm going out and listening as just like a fan, patron, what have you, is I want to hear stuff that I haven't heard before, and I guess that same thing that we strive to do in our writing or our photography is I want to hear somebody's soul. I want to really hear what they have to say, and I want to
Yeah,
learn something too, which isn't
yeah,
necessarily what everybody goes out to do. Some people want to, I feel like you go out on a Friday or Saturday night, you might hear top 40 or whatever's on the radio, and that's the assignment for the people that are there. But I think for me, it's I really want to hear like, what do you really believe in? What do you, it's like,
Hmm.
I'm sure you'll do this with your kids or friends or family, like, have you heard this song? Like, you've got to hear this, like, I
Yeah,
want a DJ that's doing that, not, they don't have to be aggressive about it, but just slip in those things where it's just like, people need to hear this, I want people to be advocates for what they believe in musically, and I try to do the same as best I can.
that's cool. Well, then, of course, then the natural next question is, what is one of your all-time songs? Not necessarily even that you play, but if Brandon Roos had a soundtrack to his soul, what would some of those key songs cuts be?
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll try not to get too extensive, but there's a bunch that
Yeah, yeah.
come to mind. I think one of the key ones that comes to mind for me, the first one off the top, is it's a song called "Be Thankful for What You've Got" by William Devon, a soul song from the '70s. My brother was a huge vinyl collector, big like soul and funk fan from like the '60s and '70s. This is from that era, but it's a very, I don't know, to me it's like one of those songs that really gets at like what life's all about,
Hmm.
and the key thing is just, just be thankful for what you've got. And yeah, that one is up there. I love a little bit of 90s R&B. Two ones that I always like to play. I used to do a Wax Wednesday with Tommy Aguilar, and I had these songs that I would consider like my essential songs that you would hear a lot. One of them is the song "Baby Baby Baby" by TLC. That's on their first album. "I Can Love You" by Mary J. Blige. That one's not one of her like most popular ones, but I'll sneak that one in whenever I can. Used to play a lot of uh, oh gosh, Janet Jackson. Um, gosh, why can't I think of it? Uh, don't the
Rhythm
one with the
Nation.
Joni, no, the Joni Mitchell sample, the "Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what
Oh,
you've got till it's gone." Um, I'm the song title is slipping my mind right now. And if I'm trying to get deep, which doesn't happen, I don't get the opportunity all that often. I would slip this in early at Wax Wednesdays or at the gigs now. It's like first half hour. I'm a huge, huge fan of Alice Coltrane, so I'll try and slip in a couple of her songs. There's a song I love called Savaya that I'll play. Journey and Satchidananda. That whole album is one of my favorite albums of all time. But the title track is just super hypnotic. I'll play that. Trying to think, or throw in a little like "Peg" by Steely Dan. I'm a Steely Dan fan too, so try and get the Dan in there when I can.
that's cool. Awesome. Great mix. I have to go back and listen to all those now. Um, so, what do you think for you then? What is your driving philosophy for your life? Like, what keeps you going? What's your North Star?
I think for me, a lot of it is just trying to utilize my skill set to try and celebrate the beauty of life, and I think a lot of that's been really focused toward celebrating art and music. I think a while back I'd really like made peace with the fact of like, well, I guess made peace makes it sound negative, but I really had come to accept that like my gift is my ability to craft like words for different
Hmm.
purposes, and I just try and use that in service to others the best that I can. I've tried to figure out in more like recent months and years trying to do that in a way that um, can provide for me to a
Yeah.
certain degree. Not to say that it doesn't pay, but arts journalism compared to like, I don't know, copywriting for like a business or something, it can be a
Yeah.
little bit different, but the skill set is, I think, uh, you can translate it. So I think it's just utilizing my skill set in the service of others, and it when I'm following that true North Star, and when I really feel galvanized and I feel that like that I am, you know, following through on that mission, I think it's really celebrating the beauty and universal power of like music and the arts, which I guess in a way
Yeah.
is, especially if I'm sharing stories about musicians, it's sort of amplifying what I already believe in sort of a covert way, because I'm such a huge believer in the power of music. But I guess that
Yeah.
that would probably be the my answer.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. So then let's talk kind of briefly about that. Um, what's easier to make a living at, writing or DJing?
I don't know. I both are both can be difficult. I think and both in terms of like they have that freelance capacity, which it can get really busy and it can be pretty desolate, and they're kind of on a project by project basis. And with both, I've never been amazing at like being able to kind of round out a schedule in terms of like, all right, I've got like 10 assignments this month. I tend to be a little bit, um, I don't want to say a little bit more selective, but I've just never, I'm not great at selling myself in that way. I've never been good at like pitching. It's one of my works in progress, I guess, is trying to like sing my praises. I tend to be one of those like my work speaks for itself kind of thing. Um, but I don't know. I would probably say DJing versus writing in terms of like on a gig by gig basis, but um, I also think if you get involved more, which is kind of where I've tried to steer myself in recent months, is like figuring out how to utilize my skill set in a more business focused way. I mean, that might be a little bit more lucrative, but admittedly I hadn't been trying to like leverage my skill set in that way, and it took a little bit of a reality check and ego check on my end to like feel like doing so wasn't quote unquote selling out. I
Right.
tended to have a real black and white view on that kind of stuff, and thankfully it's
Yeah.
kind of been rounded out in recent years.
Yeah. That's cool. Well, it's cool even here too. I mean, like, to get your start is with Hip Hop DX, right? Was that it was a cold call email, right? And that's the thing, right? Like, who knows what else is out there, right? Once we start putting ourselves out there, not even so much like we're boasting about ourselves, but because we want to be involved and share our gifts, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's an example that I still think back to this day, and I think it's something I still try and like live by. I'm not great at it. It's still a real struggle, but my ex-girlfriend at the time was the one who had really like pushed me to send the email, because I was so scared that I was going to be wasting the time of these people that I revered and I wanted to be, and like I don't want to get brushed off, or like I would be crushed if I didn't hear back. And as simple as it sounds, it never made sense to me until the moment she said this. But she was just like, well, what do you have to lose? Like, all the worst they can do is say no, and you're basically back where you're at right now. Like, and if you don't have what they need, like, why don't you just ask what it would take? And I just thought, I you can do that. And so i
Right.
so i
Yeah.
sent the
Yeah.
email and just asked, and it took about, I forget how many weeks. It was probably over a month, but I heard back, and then I checked the name. It was a guy named Jake Payne. Shout out Jake Payne. He was the editor in chief of Hip Hop DX at the time, and the editor in chief emailed me back and just asked me to tell him a little bit more about myself. And um, I showed the email to one of my friends, and he was like, you basically wrote the cover letter of your life to this guy in terms of like
That's
what I
awesome.
wanted to accomplish and everything. And I don't know, it reminded me of like you saying that, of like, what do you have to lose? Because a lot of these gigs can be just like putting yourself out there, cold emails, cold calls, and never hearing back. But every once in a while, or sometimes more frequently, you hear back and you develop those connections. It's just that I've always been terrified by that fear of rejection, even with a decade long career and of extensive portfolio at this point. I still look at it like I'm an amateur.
Yeah. 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 It's hard to know. I mean, I think that's the thing too, especially when you start to do it and then you're doing it so often, you kind of forget the body of work that you've created. Like, I went to your Contently page, right? And it's like, oh my gosh, this is extensive. Like, how many? I was just thinking, like, how many interviews have you done? Do you think in your life so far? Like it's
Well,
got to be
it's probably
thousands or write-ups, right? I
no,
mean,
I
a
would probably
thousand.
say no, I would probably say if I had to ballpark it, I'd say probably somewhere between like 2 and 300. I think I have like 160 on there, and there's probably numerous other ones that aren't included. I know I'm trying to get I'm trying to get my the print some of the print stuff that wasn't living online for content. I know I've been trying to like add that in because I know there's a few in particular I'm very, very, very proud of, and would have them up above the at the top of what I do. But I'd probably say like maybe 300 at this point. But yeah, it's just
Really?
like,
Seems like more.
yeah, I mean, maybe I would. That's probably my ballpark. And unfortunately, I know some of that stuff is got lost. There were a few things I did in the early days for San Jose Jazz before they when they migrated from one to the next. I think back to
Yeah.
Bennett Roth Newell, who's a local pianist.
Oh yeah.
I did this column called On the Scene where I was like writing about local musicians just to kind of like
Yeah.
highlight them
That's
because
cool.
they, people are, as you see, people can be super active, and unless there's some timely thing or there's some big splash event, they don't necessarily get the coverage they deserve for what they're doing. And I remember he hit me up to try and he wanted to post about the article, and I think it wasn't available online anymore. So there's probably a
Yeah.
few stories out there that got lost along the way. But yeah, it's been a
Eh,
while. It's just I don't know if you're this way too, but I get so out of sight, out of mind. It's always just so like I've got to focus on the next one. I've got to focus on the next one,
right.
and as soon as it's gone, I don't
It's over.
I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
think about it. And it's just funny because I'll actually go back and read these, and I'm always of the mindset of like, oh no, these I've got to be 10 times better than I was like a couple years back, and then I'll like read a story and think like, man, that was a really good sentence right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
this
Yeah.
guy this guy's
That's
pretty good.
yeah. That's how I do that with photos too. Like same thing. It's like I'm on to the next. Love doing the next thing, and then I forget about stuff, and then I'll go back and I'll go like, oh, that was actually, and I'll hate it, right, and be like, okay, whatever, and then I'll go back and then be like, oh, that's better. And some photographer told me one time, one professor said like, yeah, somehow your photos get better when they're in the drawer.
Oh,
Because when you come back to them, they're like, oh, because we beat ourselves up because we have an expectation, right?
yeah.
Of like what the perfect ideal like a story or photo is, and we're living for that, and then we do it, but we got time pressures, we got word counts, whatever, and then it comes out and you're like, oh, I had to compromise, it didn't come out the way I wanted, and just sheer self-loathing, and then you come back and oh, it's kind of good.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. Because yeah, I mean, I know there's certain times where I keep feeling like there's something more that I can do. There's something more that I can do, and I thankfully in recent years, I don't know if it was just my time at San Jose Jazz, where thankfully I doing social media work, doing blog writing, different things, email copywriting. You just kind of realize like there's only so much you could put in a tweet, for example, right? And sometimes like what matters more is the timeliness of it. And if as long as it feels good enough for that moment in time, it's okay. Not everything has to be totally perfect, and sometimes what you sacrifice in the pursuit of perfection isn't needed. And so thankfully I've been able to I feels weird saying this, I've been able to value my art, I guess not value it less, but like have less of an iron grip about it, and just understand, because there might be some times where I'm just going crazy feeling like there's more that I can do, and just say like, hey, I think this is what we can do, and just accept where something's at that moment in time. And just but yeah, like that is true, being able to like look back in retrospect, I'm not as like in the weeds and not just driving myself crazy. There were times being on deadline back in the old Cafe for Scotty days where I'd be summertime and I'm like sweating through my clothes upstairs, telling myself like, "You're not leaving until you turn this story in." And I'm there for hours. And now I look back and just say, I don't know if that was the most thoughtful way. I've grown to appreciate sometimes you just gotta hit pause and come back at it with
Yeah.
fresh eyes. And to me, I think that's what we're doing, is like we have that safe distance now, and we can say like, you know what, that one was pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. And as you learn more about the craft, you can kind of self edit and you can pick things and know, like, oh, this is the theme. This is the story. This is the way, you know what I mean? Like you can kind of start to get better tools in your toolbox, right? So you don't have to stress. It's not so unknown, right?
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah, I found that was the case when, well, hopefully people agree with me when they read the stories, but I kind of felt that way with the stories for this next issue. I had done pieces on Jack Pavlina and Doc's
Yeah.
Black, very
Yeah.
different stories, but
Yeah.
I used to do this thing where like, and I still well, not fully, but still basically transcribe all of my stories almost verbatim every time, and I know multiple
Crazy.
friends have told me this. It's a waste of time. There's better ways to do it. I think you even sent me a thing about how there's like an app to do it, and I'm still like,
Yeah.
nope, still gonna do it. I just tell myself
Yeah.
like it's how I ingest the stories, but I've realized like
Yeah,
I
totally.
used to feel like I did the interview, you've got to throw it away, you don't remember anything, transcribe it, throw it away, you don't know anything, get the quotes,
Hmm.
now start piecing it together. And now, like, I found that I just could trust my instinct on those two stories. I got to the
Yeah.
end of the conversation, and then I'll still do this thing where it's like, just get a legal pad and just start writing the story, off the top of
Yeah.
your head. And, like, if you don't know the quote, put some brackets there, this quote about this. And I realize that
Yeah.
oftentimes that, like, inspiration that comes, it's like, just how somehow naturally, like you're saying, like in the process you're like, oh yeah, this story is about this and this, and like, you're able to kind of craft this thing by just trusting your intuition and catching those finer points. It's I don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. I can trust my
Yeah.
instincts and believe that, like, I know a thing or two about a narrative.
Yeah. You do. Yeah. That's cool.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, awesome. So thank you so much for taking time and sharing about your life and your work. And I'm excited for people to read that story about Jack and Docs. They're great, and they're great musicians, and so that's fun. And thank you for all these 9 years, 10 years. I guess we're going on 10 years, and you came in the second year. So yeah, there's 9 years of helping out with the magazine, and I'm looking forward to 9 more at least.
Well, yeah, I mean, likewise, Daniel. Thank you so much for what you do and everything you do in the community. It's an honor to be able to, like, help serve the cause and share a bunch of stories about really awesome people. I cherish the opportunity to, like, let people know about the awesome people that are right there under their nose in this Silicon Valley. So thank you for the opportunity and
Yeah.
and content. I'm excited to see where the journey takes us.
Yeah, awesome. And thank you. I mean, content wouldn't exist without the written content. So thank you, Brandon. Okay. Well, we'll talk offline and get together for a cup of coffee and beer and maybe even food.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll see you soon.
Okay, take it easy. To find out more about Brandon, go to his website, brandonroos.contently.com. Thank you for listening to the Content Magazine podcast. Follow us on social media at Content Mag. Visit our website to become a member and help us to continue to tell the stories of the local creatives. This episode's music is 408 by Jack Pavlina. Find out more about Jack on his Instagram at Jack Pavlina Music.